Flames from a solitary oil lamp tremble in a dim chamber, revealing clay tablets worn by millennia, yet still etched with mysterious cuneiform. Among them, the name Lilith emerges, not the demon whispered about, but a wind spirit haunting the jagged edges where order fades into chaos. Her story is older than Scripture itself, a whisper before the dawn of Adam and Eve. Every shadow cast on these ancient tablets is a trace of a woman who refused to be bound, who chose exile over submission and vanished beyond the garden's walls. What remains is not merely myth, but the echo of a power institutions tried to erase forever. In the shadowed corridors of ancient Mesopotamia, where dusty shelves groan beneath brittle clay tablets, the earliest incarnations of Lilith took shape. The archaeological record tells a different story than Scripture. Her original name, Lilitu, belonged to a class of night spirits tied to wind and wilderness, entities neither fully malevolent nor benign. These daughters of the desert roamed the borderlands between civilization and the unknown, their figures as untamed and mercurial as the desert storm itself. Protective amulets carved from lapis lazuli and carnelian, inscribed with her name, have surfaced in astounding quantities across the Near East, intended to ward her influence off sleeping infants and vulnerable women. Thousands of protective amulets bearing her name have been excavated across the ancient Near East. The delicate blue stones caught the flicker of torchlight, casting kaleidoscopic sparks that shimmered like fragments of some forgotten divine order. The scribes who preserved this understood they were recording something dangerous, something that defied easy categorization. At the heart of these earliest myths, the name Lilith denoted wind spirit in the Sumerian tongue, a force connected to nature's most chaotic and unpredictable breath. She was blamed for infant mortality and nighttime terrors, but her essence was not that of a demon in the modern sense. Beneath layers of demonization, the original figure begins to surface, a fierce, autonomous agent of liminal space. Long before the biblical texts codified their theology, this female figure embodied freedom and boundary breaking. What survives in fragments contradicts what survives in official canon. The oldest texts describe her not as evil, but as untamed, an independent force neither sanctioned by gods nor subdued by men. In some hymns, she is linked to the screech owl and the desert wind, symbols of loneliness and danger, but also of mysterious power. Her voice, imagined as a howling gust, was the breath of wilderness itself. This version predates the familiar narrative by 15 centuries, predating the story of Adam and Eve by a vast gulf of time where oral traditions intertwined with the sacred and the profane. The transformation from spirit to monster followed a precise political timeline as ancient societies codified hierarchies of power. Initially, Lilith was part of a rich tapestry of female wilderness spirits, but as patriarchal systems solidified, the narratives hardened into warnings and condemnations. The volume of artifacts dedicated to warding her off speaks to the depth of ancient fear. Households might hang an amulet not because they worshipped her, but because they recognized a power they could never fully control. She represented a freedom untraceable in male-dominated structures. If we look through the prism of modern popular culture, Lilith is the archetype of someone like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones, a woman who refuses to accept imposed roles and forges a path beyond tradition. Her story is not mere folklore, it is a challenge to the order patriarchies attempted to impose. The controversial claim here is that Lilith was never meant to be a villain. Her demonization is a calculated erasure, an attempt to suppress a woman who dared to claim equality and independence at the dawn of civilization. The ancient tablets whisper of a time when stories accommodated complexity rather than enforcing simple binaries. The myths reveal a layered figure whose wings stretched beyond the confines of orthodox theology. Each inscription, each amulet, acted like a voice from a lost world, demanding re-examination. The risk was not just spiritual, but political. Control over narratives meant control over social order. This begins a journey into how the figure of Lilith was reimagined radically over centuries. The question that lingers is this: what did the original Lilith symbolize that later orthodoxies feared so intensely? The answer, buried in time and dust, begins to unfold here, but only after peeling back the sediment of centuries of censorship. As we dive deeper, the tangled web of her transformation will reveal not only ancient fears, but our own present discomfort with the untamable feminine force. The story of Lilith took a defining turn in the 9th century of the Common Era with the appearance of the enigmatic text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. This medieval work, purportedly satirical, injects Lilith directly into the biblical narrative as Adam's first wife, an addition that contradicts the Genesis account so starkly that some authorities propose suppressing it outright. The 9th century text that changed everything was written as satire, or so its authors claimed. Unlike the silent presence she held in earlier mythology, here Lilith becomes vocal, defiant, demanding equality with Adam. She refuses to lie beneath him during their union, arguing that two beings shaped from the same clay cannot accept hierarchy. Her refusal shatters the biblical harmony and introduces a radical notion of female autonomy that the text's editors struggled to contain. 3 manuscript traditions preserve 3 different versions of this transgression, each variation emphasizing the radical nature of her escape. The word she spoke, to escape, a divine name so sacred it appears nowhere else in canonical scripture, becomes a symbol of forbidden power. Between editorial redactions, the original meaning still bleeds through, revealing a struggle over meaning that is itself a historic battleground between orthodoxy and dissent. The silence surrounding her in official texts is itself a kind of testimony to the threat her story posed. Mystical traditions, hidden, marginal, often suppressed, kept alive what orthodoxy tried to extinguish. The passage's radical defiance raises a portrait of a woman who embodies rebellion not as flawed evil, but as a principle. Her escape from paradise, granted by uttering the ineffable name of God, is not a fall, but a flight. This is where everything changes. The story resists simplification. It suggests that paradise is a cage, and that true freedom comes from refusal to submit. To call Lilith a demon ignores the radical political and theological implications of her act. Historically, the debate over this passage remains unresolved because resolution would be too destabilizing to traditional hierarchies and patriarchal control over sexuality and authority. Older manuscripts reveal what later editors systematically removed, illuminating a conflict between preserving order and acknowledging chaos. Every character choice, every phrase excised or preserved, speaks volumes about the religious anxieties of the time. Controversially, this story casts doubt upon the rigid biblical narrative and offers a glimpse of theological pluralism in the medieval period, far preceding modern feminist interpretations. The incarnation of Lilith in the alphabet makes her a provocateur. She is not just a myth, but a challenge to the foundational myths themselves. In this light, she shares motifs with Prometheus from Greek myth, punished for revealing forbidden knowledge, cursed for breaking cosmic laws for the sake of freedom. While the exact origins of this text remain cloaked in mystery, the linguistic artistry and subversive nature suggest an author deeply invested in exploring boundaries, pushing against doctrinal strictures. This text did more than narrate. It redefined Lilith, shaking the pillars of authority. The effect rippled through esoteric traditions and folk beliefs alike. The question remains open, poised on the edge of controversy. Was the Alphabet of Ben Sira a mockery of the myth or a radical affirmation disguised as satire? Whatever the answer, it shaped the enduring image of Lilith saving herself through powerful, forbidden words. Her voice becomes a weapon, her story a refuge for those who resist domination. As we move on, the transformation from this sacred text into popular demonology reveals the mechanisms of myth-making and control. If Lilith's story was censored for her defiance, what does that say about the control of feminine power through history? Let us know whether Lilith represents the dangerous rebel or a misunderstood trailblazer in the comments. The story of Lilith's fall from equal partner to vilified demon was not a gradual drift, but a deliberate reconstruction spanning centuries. The transformation from equal to enemy took 3 centuries of deliberate revision, each phase reflecting shifting social values and the consolidation of patriarchal power. Early Jewish writings began to recast her autonomy as dangerous insubordination, recasting her refusal to submit as a defining flaw. Each generation added new horrors to her description, each serving a specific social function, feeding fears of uncontrolled female power while reinforcing masculine authority. By the medieval period, she was no longer a mere spirit, but a child killer, seducer, and nightmare visitor. Protective amulets against her influence included the names of angels, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Semangelof, symbols meant to ward off her deadly reach. This was not mythology naturally evolving, it was propaganda being manufactured, weaponizing fear for social order. The attributes assigned to her map directly onto documented male anxieties of the period: unchecked sexuality, independence from male control, mysterious nocturnal powers. From autonomous spirit to child killer. The rewriting followed a recognizable template used to contain threats deemed dangerous to male dominance. The monster they constructed reveals exactly what the constructors feared. Lilith became the embodiment of the chaos that patriarchy sought to control and suppress. The defiant female, the uncontrollable, the shadow of male authority. This process carried out in the folklore, theology, and literature of Jewish communities from Babylonian exile through medieval Europe. The repetition was deliberate, the effect cumulative. In many ways, the persistence of Lilith in the popular imagination owes as much to this demonization as to her original symbolism. By transforming her into an adversary, the myth ensured her story permeated Jewish and later Christian folklore. But the original figure was buried beneath layers of fear and moralistic retelling. This transformation betrays a larger cultural anxiety about autonomy, sexuality, and power within social structures. It is a warning story dressed as myth. The controversial claim that emerges here is that this demonization reflects more about the fears of historical societies than any supernatural truth. This aligns with patterns seen across cultures where independent female figures who resist subjugation are systematically rebranded from divine to demonic. Fear, weaponized systematically, can transform a goddess into a demon within 2 generations. Revisiting this transformation through the lens of pop culture, one could compare Lilith's narrative to Maleficent in the Jolie film adaptation. Originally portrayed as a villain, the character later emerges as a wronged, misunderstood force of nature. Both stories pivot from condemnation to complexity, revealing the multiplicity of feminine power beyond simplistic good and evil. This invites us to reconsider how myths enforce cultural norms and how subversive figures sneak through cracks in dominant narratives. The challenge is to unravel the layers woven by centuries of revision to glimpse the untamed soul beneath. As we turn to the esoteric traditions next, the thread connecting Lilith's darkness and light will become clearer. Her demonization was a veil over a cosmic balance, long hidden from public view. Beyond the surface of public theology, hidden esoteric traditions reframed Lilith as a necessary cosmic principle rather than a monstrous outcast. The mystics refused to accept the simplified, sanitized version of her. In Kabbalistic cosmology, she occupies a position no mere demon could hold. She is the dark counterpart to the Shekinah, the feminine divine presence. Here, what orthodoxy labeled evil, the mystics recognized as necessary. The Zohar's portrait inverts everything the mainstream tradition believed, portraying Lilith as an expression of primal energy, essential to the balance of creation. Initiation into these teachings required confronting what religion publicly denied: the shadow feminine, the wild force lurking beneath order, the sacred chaos from which life continually arises. The suppressed interpretation survived because certain truths resist burial even in the most hostile environments. In hidden diagrams of creation, she stands as equal to the divine feminine, not subordinate or wicked, but vital. These teachings transformed villain into vital cosmic principle, rich with symbolism pertaining to duality and unity. Lilith, as cosmogonic force, resonates with archetypes such as Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction who clears the path for renewal, or Persephone, who wields sovereignty in the underworld's dark depths. These figures reveal the paradox of feminine power, feared yet indispensable. In this space, Lilith's story is reclaimed as a tale of transformation and necessary destruction rather than mere malevolence. The Kabbalistic tradition suggests that creation requires both order and chaos, light and shadow. Lilith embodies the darkness that cannot be ignored, the necessary other side of divine light. To understand her is to embrace complexity where most prefer comfort. What was condemned in public liturgy was venerated in secret practice, a quiet rebellion encoded in mystical lore. Her image in these esoteric frameworks defies conventional morality, instead inviting reflection on balance and integration. The greater teachings challenge the mainstream narrative, beckoning students to reconsider notions of purity and sin. The controversial contention is that Lilith's true role is less antagonist and more catalyst, a force that drives spiritual evolution through confrontation with our inner shadows. She is not the villain, but the archetype of what must be acknowledged and integrated for psychic and cosmic wholeness. Considering this through a modern lens, Lilith's portrayal echoes the compelling empowerment of Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, with her journey from exile to throne. Daenerys embodies fire and destruction as instruments of transformation, just as Lilith represents the wild fire beneath spiritual awakening. The esoteric dimension peels back the layers imposed by suppression, revealing a rich tapestry of meaning that challenges preconceived notions. The Dark Queen is paradoxically the key to light's full realization. Taking this into account, the question lingers. In dismissing Lilith as evil, what fundamental truths have been lost? Unearthing this mystery demands a courageous look beyond dogma into the heart of mystery itself. Lilith's echo reverberates far beyond Jewish traditions, surfacing across cultures that had limited contact with one another. The same figure surfaces across civilizations that had no contact with one another, embodying a persistent archetype of forbidden feminine autonomy. Mesopotamian Lilitu, Greek Lamia, Roman Strix, different names, identical anxieties. These figures all share attributes that reveal a common cultural discomfort with female power unbound by patriarchal control. This pattern cannot be explained by cultural transmission alone. Rather, it speaks to something deeper lodged within collective human psychology. Wherever patriarchy consolidated power, this archetype underwent demonization, a ritual branding to keep feminine energy confined. Something in collective human psychology keeps resurrecting her across millennia, forever cycling between embrace and expulsion. The myth adapts its surface details but preserves its structural core, an autonomous female spirit who refuses submission and dazzles with both beauty and danger. Cross-cultural analysis reveals what single tradition study necessarily obscures, that Lilith's story is less about any one culture's fears and more about universal tensions surrounding authority, sexuality, and freedom. The universal presence of this figure suggests something older than any individual religion, a primordial fear of feminine sovereignty unchecked. In the modern imagination, Lilith's cross-cultural resonance is echoed in stories like Medusa's, a victim transformed into a monster by those who wronged her, embodying both terror and tragic injustice. Both figures reveal how power structures demonize that which they cannot control or assimilate. The controversial claim here is forthright. Every culture that feared her feared the same underlying threat: feminine autonomy uncontrolled. The archetype persists because it articulates something that transcends any single culture: the anxiety around the unrepentant wild woman who challenges order. This cross-cultural presence invites reflection on how myths shape societal norms globally, often weaponizing fear against female independence. It also suggests that Lilith's story is a narrative battleground for gender, power, and spiritual sovereignty. For viewers compelled by mythologies weaving through diverse cultures, Lilith's resilience offers a fascinating mirror. While societies may differ, the tensions they wrestle with are remarkably consistent. What happens when such an archetype returns from the shadows to the spotlight? Before we explore Lilith's modern resurrection, consider this. Does her persistence indicate a latent cultural rebellion or an unresolved conflict still alive in contemporary societies? Engage with this inquiry by sharing your views below. Does Lilith's archetype represent a universal symbol warning against dangerous female power, or a beacon for liberation from patriarchal constraints? Lilith's widespread myth suggests a shared cultural anxiety about female sovereignty. Do you think this archetype is a harmful stereotype or an enduring symbol of defiance? Let the discussion begin in the comments. In the modern era, Lilith's image has undergone a powerful rebirth, emerging from the shadows cast by centuries of suppression to become a symbol of defiance, empowerment, and even liberation. The reclamation began in spaces, institutions never anticipated, in feminist literature, occult circles, and popular culture. What was once weaponized against women has become a weapon in their hands. Artists, writers, and activists invoke Lilith as the archetype of resistance against oppression, turning a figure demonized as dangerous into one celebrated as fierce and free. The symbol that once signified danger now signifies defiance. From academic feminist theory to underground rituals, Lilith has become precisely what the original redactors most feared she would become: a rallying cry for autonomy and sexual sovereignty. Contemporary movements have transformed her from a cautionary tale into an icon of rebellion. Her story resonates deeply with those refusing to settle for imposed identities. This transformation is far from superficial. It exposes the enduring power of myth to evolve and reflect shifting cultural consciousness. The questions her story raises are questions this generation cannot avoid confronting, about agency, gender roles, and the nature of power itself. She has become a symbol not just of the past, but of contemporary struggles, inhabiting cultural spaces unimaginable to her earliest chroniclers. From demon to icon, the transformation continues, but now in reverse, a movement from silence and shame toward visibility and pride. Her image appears in contexts her ancient condemners could never have conceived. Tattoos, graphic novels, feminist conferences, and spiritual revival movements. The narrative designed to enforce silence has become a vocabulary for speaking, a language of empowerment that crosses artistic, political, and spiritual boundaries. 3,000 years of suppression, and she refuses to disappear. Instead, she bursts through the constraints of ancient fears to claim her place anew. This modern resurrection aligns with figures like Kali, whose destructive power is also a form of creation and liberation. The controversial assertion that emerges is that by embracing what was once feared in Lilith, contemporary culture confronts and deconstructs the patriarchal myths that have long governed female identity. Her journey mirrors that of Éowyn from The Lord of the Rings, the warrior who declares, tracing Lilith's journey from a wind spirit of ancient wilderness to Adam's defiant equal, from demonized outcast to cosmic principle and modern icon, reveals a powerful myth reflecting civilization's evolving anxieties about feminine power. Her story transcends religion and borders, embodying universal tensions between order and chaos, control and freedom. Lilith's myth persists not only because it is ancient, but because it remains dynamic, continuously rewritten by those who fear her and those who embrace her. In a world still wrestling with gender and authority, her flight from paradise reminds us that true liberation demands reclaiming the shadows as well as the light. She did not fall, she flew.